Welcome to Behind the Build. I am your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today I have back with me Darcy Jones of Darcy Jones Architects. Before we get into today's episode, powered by Walden Homes, I want to speak to you about one of our brand new sponsors of the podcast, and that is Kaplan's Appliances. And yeah, we have a sponsor. It's a family-owned and operated business in Toronto, Canada for over 80 years. And Kaplan's Appliances is in its third generation of ownership. We at Walden have been working with them for 20 years. And over those 20 years, they've serviced our clients exceptionally, be it from the sales straight through the full cycle directly into service. And in keeping with the theme of generations, well, they have generational buyers. And why is it? It's because of their expertise and their knowledge on premium brands like Sub-Zero, Wolf, Miele, Genair, Fisher-Paykel, and more. On the outdoor experience, Lynx and Kalamazoo. What they really look for is to curate the right type of experience for you as an architect or a designer, and how that translates for your clients. They actually have this amazing in-store program with an in-house chef. They'll prepare meals for all of you on the appliances that you are probably going to want to have inside that beautiful home. If you're interested in learning more about them, please email me. My email address is Jonathan, that's JONATHAN at waldenhomes.ca, and I will connect you with one of their managers. We're doing it this way because clients have come to you for who you are, the experience that you deliver, the process that you deliver. And when you meet with the manager, well, they're going to understand what you're looking for in the experience for your clients. And through that introduction, you'll be introduced to the right rep that will speak your language. With all of that said, I look forward to making these introductions to you and Kaplan's Appliances. But also, I want to introduce you to today's episode. So without further ado, here it is. Darcy, thanks for joining in again for a part two here to further delve into your practice and your overall connectivity to architecture, both here and abroad. Appreciate you taking the time again on a Saturday. So,
Oh, thanks for having me back, Jonathan.
of course.
It is fun.
So, we talked last time, we talked about the evolution of you and your career, starting from, the inception of some of the interesting jobs you had in automotive and on farms and some level of construction here and there, getting your hands dirty, and then, through school and beyond, and the evolution of the practice in the building and how you have kind of transitioned from small office space to a slightly larger office space. But we didn't really get into anything to do with, the scales of project and the locations of project. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about your flavor for architecture and what you really like to put out there. So I think let's start off with the basics of, the practice has been around now for, what was this, it's almost 20 years?
24 years.
24 years. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, 20 coming up 25 in July or August of
Wow.
next year.
Okay.
So,
So
yeah.
you're gonna be a quarter century old.
Yeah, like I started working on my own in 1999, right out of university. I would say in 2000, it was sort of like, hey, I'm actually going to do this.
Right.
Felt more fluky, and I was doing a little project for the first project out of university I was doing on my own, but I didn't think that would gonna turn into anything, and then I would go get a job.
Right. Yeah, and you were saying how you had all of a sudden you had multiple new homes you were working on.
Yeah.
So so what does it look like from like the evolution of from there to, let's call it the last like 5 to 10 years of the practice? Scales of project, locations. What does that look like, and how are you attaining these projects? What is it word of mouth? Like how do you get them?
In those, the reason I'm talking to you today is because my parents' house came out in Western Living magazine
Yep.
in 1999 in the summer,
Yep.
and we won an award in about 4 years later, 2004, 2005,
Yep.
for a house we did over on Vancouver Island near Ladysmith, and then I would say that was when the practice became more than just me. Because up until that point, I was doing construction admin. I was going to site. I was drafting.
Right.
I was a one-person office doing 2 or 3 or 4 projects at a time.
Right.
And then the calls started coming in, and they actually, interestingly, the work started to get more local then. Up until that point, it was in Kamloops and Vancouver Island,
Right.
so travel to the projects. And then, so, we started to have one employee, then two, three, four, five, and every time it got too full, we'd move to another space
Yeah.
in this building.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we have two spaces, so we have a, extra space to fit. But a lot of people think renovations, whether it's for family or not renovations, that's a thing to move past. That's filler work, that's work for kids. And to this day, that's half of our work, and they get substantial. They get to be high value, sometimes even more than our new house projects. And they vary from we're just doing the interior and hardly doing the exterior. We do additions, but we're never completely erasing the project. And we have some that maybe they were so large you'd never get that house again by current zoning. So we're actually keeping it's more like you're keeping an idea
Yeah.
more than you're keeping something of beauty.
Right.
And we're remaking it. So that's a very pragmatic reason to renovate. But we always tell people, like, if this renovation starts to become the cost of a new house, you got to have one of those other layers. Like, yeah, but you'll never get this big again. Or it's got a sighting, maybe it's too close to a setback that gives you a better backyard. So that's a cool thing
Mm.
you're going to always benefit. But in terms of those small projects, the first early projects, the renovations grew over time. I was the opposite. All the first projects were new houses and sometimes new little commercial spaces.
Right.
And so the renovations kind of ramped up at one year. Some years it was three-quarters of our work. But one thing we don't do, and I think we should try to do it, although there's confidentiality, there's people don't want to kind of have their face out there, is to marry who the clients are that we work with. There's a lot of them that get expressed in our projects. And then, some people have said, like, you try out all these ideas all the time. Like, there's a red stucco house and a shingle and a raw steel. And like, what were you rolling dice? Like, how did that come up? But they come up from like really they're not random reasons at all. Like, someone wanted like a brick house, but they didn't have the budget. So we did a red stucco with that same iron oxide appeal. Someone had a house that someone had poured a concrete wall one time. And I guess they started drinking before the wall was like properly set and the forms came off too early and it wasn't vibrated enough, but it was a mess. It was crazy. But they found it so charming, they wanted their new house to have that same raw look.
Okay.
So, so then we sandblasted it so heavy the sandblaster said, like, I'm kind of wrecking it. Like, is this really what you want? Like, I'm making a brand new wall look 100 years old. And like, yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. Well, that didn't come from me. Like, I did like it and it was beautiful. And then we try to repeat that on other projects when appropriate.
Yeah.
That essence of that project, that's totally from the client.
Interesting.
Clients who are fancy, who like put on makeup and jewelry for breakfast. And we got other clients that never comb their hair. And like, I'm not going to tell you which houses those are, but you could probably tell if you look through a portfolio. And I think like being a good listener and being good at observing like what people are saying, what they're really saying, but sort of reading between the lines and like seeing how they live and what their interests are.
Hmm.
All that stuff I find very inspirational. And that doesn't stop at residential. Like we never want to stop doing houses because there's such an experimentation, a place of experimentation.
Yeah.
But even if we're doing a gallery and there's a personality of Hornby Island and the people on the committee are really interesting artists with very quirky backgrounds. So then like all that we draw on all that stuff and turn it into a building. And then in the end, we don't really photograph them in front of the building because that's not standard or they might not be comfortable with that. But those two things shouldn't be separated.
Right.
And it's so conventional that they are separated. But as we've tried projects that are, we've done a few brick projects lately, and you're seeing more and more brick in the world. Part of that was inspired by I went and worked in Toronto on a project that it wasn't a brick house, but it was surrounded by them because it's just so great in the freeze thaw kind of cycle.
Yeah.
Have a bit of that in Winnipeg, although it tends to be maybe a little more stucco and stone. But it comes from our renovations my house was about 100 years old when we started renovating it. And we pulled off this asbestos siding before there was any hazmat or demo rules. That's that's changed now. You'd have to have wrapped the house in plastic. And behind that, there was shingles, cedar shingles that I could have just kept. They were so good. So 100 years old. They've been out of the weather for 15 years or so. But that's the best siding in the Vancouver area because it's 3 layers and it doesn't rot. And
Right.
we have houses we renovate where we just leave the shingles on the house and repaint them. So when I see that lasting 100 years, of course, we want to do that on our new houses. And when I see brick virtually being as good as new, if you wash it and repoint it, well, of course, we should start doing that on our projects because these things just last. So
Yeah.
that we're always learning from our older projects, and we're particularly learning from our renovations.
Yeah, the renovation space, it's a beautiful thing to be able to take something that is old and potentially tired and just inject some new life into it while also maintaining what you had described, and that is those setbacks. Because what do you want to do? You want to go to committee of adjustment and then
Yeah,
go fight for that again, or do you just want to move forward from where you are? You can
yeah,
waterproof from the interior. You can do all of that stuff. There's ways to work with what's there,
yes,
especially when you're cutting out the cost and the carbon footprint. All that
yes,
additional demolition is a lot of carbon. You don't you
yes.
you might not need to experience.
Well, yeah, I didn't make it up, and it's almost a cliche, but when they say the greenest building is the one that's already there, like we have the full spectrum. We're doing, I think, our third net zero house, solar panels on the roof, but we always want to hide them. We don't want that stuff to be an aesthetic.
Yeah,
They're super energy efficient, but it would have been better to have kept the house that was torn down before we built that house. In those cases, it was actually almost condemned. It was so bad, like that wasn't possible.
right.
But that sort of that bothers me a little bit where, we need to put a, super energy efficient new building in, with often when you do a very energy efficient building in Vancouver, the solar panels don't come from Canada. The glass comes from Korea or Greece or Switzerland. That's changing, but there's all these materials traveling all over the world, and you tore a house down. It's like, it sometimes seems to be not make total sense.
Yeah. We had a client we were building for a couple of years ago, and they were very adamant about sourcing everything locally.
Yes.
Much as could be sourced locally was sourced locally,
Yeah.
just to avoid all the additional carbon.
Yeah. And we've got some interesting current projects that are one's a restoration of a Rontom house.
Oh,
Not not one of his major works, but very charming. And we're putting wood windows back in that are made in Burnaby, and
beautiful.
they're faithful to the original one. And it's actually because it's a restoration, and the only way we could make it look faithful to what was already there. It's a restoration edition, and then we're still doing some kind of modern touches, but a very light touch. But it's interesting that it's so local because we're being so faithful to what was there.
Is this in BC?
It's in West Vancouver.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, just outside Vancouver.
Yeah, I'm likely gonna be having a chat with Adam about their practice.
Yeah. Oh, Adam Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It really, there's sort of career one in the West, and there's career two, or part one and part two in Toronto area.
yeah,
And they have what I like about his projects is, I mean, they're dim, like, mid-century buildings on the West Coast are actually not as full of light as people would say, but they're very comfortable. They have like a complexity, they sort of hug you, like they're very comfortable buildings to be in,
yeah,
and that come across in photos.
yeah. And you're talking about a pretty much a wide variety of project between renovation and new builds. Are you bound? Like, do you feel like you could work anywhere? And would you want to work anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we did a little renovation in Hawaii and one in Mexico.
Oh,
Some clients out with sort of some landscape, but the most serious project outside of Canada, and we've worked in the US, but the US, besides that its codes are actually a little bit more sophisticated, like they factored in that, brick has an R value a little bit into wall assemblies. So we did a project on Vashon Island, which is just off Seattle,
okay.
Point Roberts, and across the prairies in Canada. We've got designs for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But the biggest stretch for us was a project in Switzerland. It's about an hour south of Zurich.
Okay.
And I had been talking with The owner is Spanish and he's married someone who's Swiss. So he already was an outsider in Switzerland who would typically probably not like bring a Canadian in to do design. But we've been talking for at least 5 years back and forth. He found our website somehow and then he hired a couple architects and was always really disappointed with what they were doing. But it was on a tiny little village near a sawmill that was probably about 10 houses. But what they call a house in Switzerland, the zoning for what you would think Switzerland has with its rules and zoning, you could do a small house or what I would call a small apartment building all beside each other. So it was surprisingly liberating, which you'd think that's not the country where you can kind of do what you want.
Yeah.
And all you do is you propose something and then you use some two by fours to make the silhouette of it as if you could put a tent over it, but you just do the front and back facade. I think you leave it up for a couple of weeks, and if no one complains, you're good to go.
Really?
Like, so it's still very democratic. And then we hired a local architect who was a very technical person.
Yeah.
What's super interesting is in Switzerland, the architect is the builder, or the architect I would call a construction manager,
Right.
hiring concrete forming. He's
Yep.
hiring, we did it all prefab. The whole structure went up in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
So it's basically a passive house, but they don't call it that there. It's just a house there.
It's the house. Yeah.
It could have gone one more level up, but that had diminishing returns and super energy efficient sandwich panels. But every time he proposed something, we're like, why, you have larch, which we thought was super interesting. We don't have larch in BC. We do, but we don't really look at it. We don't
Yeah.
really look with it. He says we put plasterboard on that from the prefab company called Wrangley. And I said, can we just pull the plasterboard off, maybe save some money, and then just look at this beautiful wood? And I said, okay, I guess you can do that. So he was a very great collaborator. And
How did you come across him?
the owner found him because he was very local. He
Okay.
was probably another half an hour down the road, and he was very experienced. He's older than I am, but there's no cost plus in Switzerland. That's the price. You're going to do it for that price. It's almost like everyone has a chart of fees, like a dentist, and that's what you charge. So the cost certainty is was refreshingly spot on, right? Like it costs what he said it would cost. But they're super specific. This will cost this much no matter who you hire to do the concrete. But they also have a little small print at the bottom of all their contracts, and they're allowed to screw up. They even stipulate how much they can screw up. Like a beam can sag, I don't know, 5 millimeters, and you can't withhold any money from us. So the house has little quirky mistakes like that, but they're like, those are all acceptable mistakes because it says so. And we did a prefab steel stair that had to be craned in, and they dropped it and almost like hurt a guy. And then they spilled a bunch of oil when they built it, and it had to be kind of ground out of the concrete. Like, so all that stuff we have
Could they get it all out?
pretty sort of. But
We're
I
allowed to
thought,
have 20% oil in the concrete.
yeah, you can have a stain as long as it's like not bigger than,
Yeah.
but
And we'll take the square footage, and as long as it's under a certain threshold, you cannot
yeah.
say anything.
But it was such a smooth project because of all these things.
Right.
And that human element comes in to projects, even in a country that I would have thought going into it was more sophisticated than us and how they build. It was very fun to work on. I mean, we're still helping them with some little revisions and additions they want to do on the interior. And
When was this project completed?
it's probably been done for about 4 years.
Okay.
And then maybe coming up five, I saw it when I was over there and stayed with them, and we had it photographed by a photographer that we use from here, but he goes home to Italy every summer, so he popped in but it's a totally different mindset because they could have built basically an apartment building and they built what is probably a 2,200 square foot house. It's
Right.
basically a modest 3 bedroom house with a carport
Right.
and a little pottery studio because she's doing art now. But that was an eye opener because it wasn't terribly hard to work in another country. And we had Skype calls. There was no Zoom in those days.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, they'd have some questions, and it would be the beginning of my day. And at home, I'm having coffee. I would talk with the builder and the client, and I never talked to any trades because of the language barrier.
Right.
They also picked this architect because he had great English. So that,
Got it. I'll tell you that when I was doing my own renovation of my house, I had trades in that English was not the first language pretty much up
Yeah.
until framing.
Yeah.
And we try to implore our construction managers, when you have people on site that English is not the first language, use the technology that's available. So I was using Google Translate every
Yeah.
day for the first like two and a half months on site, and it was beautiful. To be able to exchange ideas and pleasantries and jokes to make people feel
Yeah.
like they're a part of something more than just being a physical person on site, that there's a
Yeah.
connectivity.
Yeah.
You got the best out of them. And so it was a bunch of Spanish speaking people and Romanian and Ukrainian and Italian, and it was Portuguese. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think there's another level of enthusiasm too.
Completely.
But if you're standing in front of a wall or a detail and you can talk with your hands and point at the thing you're building,
Yeah.
the communication is half nonverbal anyway on a construction site,
Yeah.
especially once there's stuff to look at and
Yeah.
details to look at. And we still do that in Vancouver sometimes. Like it's just that's going to be way easier to explain on site than a bunch of PDFs, and it will actually take less time.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty cool. And the fact that you got to be, sorry, I'm going back to this, but the fact that you were able to go there and stay with the clients inside of this house, how many times were you there over the course of construction?
zero.
Zero. Wow.
But we work out of town a lot, so
Yep.
we've done projects, and I mean, engineers now can do their inspections of rebar with photos. That's considered professional.
Yep.
But on our out of town projects where it's super expensive to fly us on a float plane, we just say we got to have an internet connection. Like we have to be able to have FaceTime, or Zoom isn't even that appropriate. So, a lot of times we'll have the builder walk around or take videos. Videos are way better than photos.
Yeah.
I have a job on Hornby Island where he walks around and shows us what they've been working on and asks a question, sort of pointing at the wall with this camera running.
Yep.
And then we'd already been doing that before people started doing Zoom so much. I did it with the Swiss job with Skype, which is crappy compared to Zoom. It was always skipping.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll get those videos and then we'll mark them up with arrows and dimensions and send that back to people as screenshots. So we've been working out of town so successfully for so long that, some people will phone us for like a project on a Gulf Island or Denman Island or something like that. And they'll be like, is this going to cost a lot more because you're not local? And we're like, no, it's going to cost the same, right? Because we do a lot of work in the neighborhood. I was just driving around, someone from University of Manitoba, my thesis advisor was in town this week, since I talked to you last time, and
Yeah.
showing him about half the projects. So probably 25 projects I could walk to in 10 or 15 minutes when we're done here today. So those jobs, construction phase for our time, they're not that much cheaper than our out of town projects because we've kind of taken advantage of this technology.
Right. So internally within the practice now, you have remind me, how many staff?
We're kind of with someone who's part-time and with maternity, we're kind of at 10 at any time.
So
9, 10, 11, something like that.
and what are the roles of those that are involved now, both on and off?
We often have a Dalhousie or a TMU co-op student at any time.
Yeah.
Those we have a lot of us from the office have some tie with a little bit with University of Manitoba. That's Dalhousie would be higher.
Yeah.
That would be like a floater person. They would help do renderings or maybe do a set of interior drawings. Once we help out with the interior drawings.
Yeah.
Because we do as many drawings for the interior as the exterior. So standard project would be 100 pages and it's 50-50 inside and outside. So, but it's very flat otherwise. So then, senior people would do the harder projects. They would mentor other people if there's questions, but everyone would work on 2 or 3 or 4 projects. And then if someone has only been here a few years, they might do a smaller interior only project. And then they would just come to me with questions. So, I think we touched on that last week,
Yeah.
where all day, every day, it feels like it's a design studio. And that's why I love it so much is it's like, what are we going to do here? Something came up during construction or pre-construction, and it's just design, design, design. So they come to me with design questions or problems.
Yeah.
and they would totally run the permitting aspect of it, all the administration. You
Right.
know, I wouldn't get involved in that as much because that's a bit more black and white work.
Yep.
And then, 3 or 4 projects for someone young can be a lot on their plate, but we kind of learn to stagger them. Do all the construction drawings while another one's being built, because the builder might call every few days, or you go to site depending on the project, a couple weeks, every couple of
Yep.
weeks.
Yep.
And then maybe there's something out for permits. You're not like actively working on all 4 of your projects or all 3. And then we technically on Thursday, but I finished a Doctor of Design degree at the University of Calgary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. I defended in May and I was done my revisions by June, but formally grad was this week. So our research was to sort of pause thinking about beauty and design and proportion and like find other ways that like design can change and become more progressive by looking at things through new eyes. And usually it was weird combinations or finding loopholes or doing what everyone thinks you should be doing, but nobody is. So we did 11 case studies. And in that case, everyone in the office participated in some form or another. A couple people helped me put together like all the graphics for it. So we'd like that to become a second book of our office. But ideally, that can be something that's actually taught and tested in an academic setting
Yeah.
or be a studio theme for a few times. So it's again testing it with more young people in school. It's been tested at people at the intern or architect stage right now.
Hmm.
So as much as I can, it's nice to involve everybody and not say like the more interesting or like we'd like to do a design competition every time one comes up. But if everyone pitches in some ideas, it makes for a better project. So
Yeah.
that flat hierarchy to the best that we can pull it off, I think is a better place to work. It's what I would always have wanted.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I don't know because I never really worked anywhere. So but it's an experiment that I think is going well.
Well, and it keeps everybody kind of like, first level, but also
Yeah.
invested in the collective group that,
Yeah.
there's a strong tie to each other, right?
Yeah. Well, I think my personal hell in any kind of project is to be pigeonholed to like only ever do one thing. And I think architects that go through school and become licensed, they're just naturally people that are much more curious. They just don't want to do the same thing every day. So it's a perfect job in that way. And then someone isn't like the schematic design person, or someone isn't the envelope detailing person, which
Right.
do happen when offices get larger. We couldn't pull that off if we tried, but it makes the learning curve really steep for young people, but also really rewarding because you actually get through all that stuff fast and then you get into the ideas and the concepts and experimentation and tweaking what we did on the last project. So you can kind of get there faster, I think, by
Hmm.
sort of thrown into it fast and as soon as you start working.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, I think that's pretty rare. You're not often, I think, given the opportunity to be able to get directly into it right away. Because I think some people are also, I could say some people, I mean, like principals might be concerned about time, right? If they're going and doing something and it's not directly in line with what is expected, there's the
yes,
potential for rework, and that requires time and effort
yeah,
and
and
risk.
can't always be reimbursed for that.
That's
So you want
right.
to watch the overhead and
Yeah, but if you're looking at the investment in the people, and there's the keen interest in wanting to potentially retain good talent, you're creating that talent.
yeah,
So it's a risk and reward situation.
because the teams inevitably are small here. Like it's me plus a project lead and probably maybe someone junior or one of our co-op students floating in and out.
Right.
And then if there's a real time crunch, someone else might come in and help someone get their interior drawings out the door.
Right.
That because of that, I know everything that's going on, like every millimeter, every material, everything we changed last week because of something that came up on site.
Hmm.
So the only negative or the only con in our way of doing it is sometimes people don't know what the other person in the office is working on because they're all talking to me, but they're talking to me separately.
Right. So
Um, so we're trying to have so on Friday we bring in lunch and someone will talk about what's going on in their project or a trip they had or
yeah.
something quirky, whatever they feel like, and just to share, or maybe if there's questions people have. And you have to do that more in our model of working.
Yeah.
And as jobs just about are ready for people to move in, then everyone in the office will go tour it. So you get to see,
What someone else has been working.
especially if you get to see where all this is going.
Yeah.
And they can kind of point out the challenging bits. And so we've had a few Friday pinups, which when there's kind of a problem that me and another person are like, oh, we can't figure this out. What's bugging us? Like it's not good enough yet. So then we'll pin it up, and we're starting to do that a little bit more.
Oh, that's fun. So that the other people get to have part of their creative juice and figure it
Yeah.
out together as a team.
Yeah. And
That's
also we like friendly competition around here. So we'll
yeah.
have like carving contests, and there's an award, and we have a Christmas ornament competition, and
So
but
all those pumpkins.
I I think it keeps the part of school and design studio alive that really ultimately what is what everyone liked about architecture
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
That's what sticks in your head is the thing that made it different from what your other friends not taking architecture were doing. Because whether you admit it or not, you are competing with each other for pinup day, right? You wanted to have a good crit. You wanted the jury that came to like have nice things to say, not rip you apart too much, right? So
We implemented a number of years ago now a biweekly town hall where we go
yeah,
over, what's the direction that we're moving, what is working, what is not working. Individual people bring up, issues that we might have with a vendor, or you bring up, how does communication look on site with our partners and what can be improved. And it's just a general 30-minute time frame where the whole company comes together. And because in what we do, it's no one, we're not in an office. A lot of the people are out on site managing
all
the
right,
construction.
right,
So that connectivity has really, I think, helped spark some creative exchange of information because when you're working through teams, especially, one construction manager will message another construction manager asking for a solution for a problem that they're currently
yeah.
encountering, and there's this beautiful dialogue that can happen.
So you like it would be a question period in the 30 minutes, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, we're
Someone could talk about a problem and someone in that meeting would have a solution.
potentially, or they'll bring forward a problem like we have different channels and teams. And one of the channels and teams is for construction managers, and it's for them to be able to say, hey, here's something that we just did on site. We found it worked really well. If you're getting to this stage in project, mark this and pin this comment, come back
Yeah,
to it because you might find this is going to be a good solution for you when you reach it. Or, I've tried to wrap my head around this detail and how to accomplish it. Can one of you guys come forward with potential solution for how to get this to happen without bothering our design partner if we don't have to, so that when we want to go forward and provide a solution to our design partner, we've now talked about it internally and tried to figure it out internally so that we can provide that solution. Say, is this acceptable? And it
yeah.
works. It works really well.
When that old new, like as much as we can be on Zoom and we could technically all be working from home, I would be difficult for me to talk with everyone like I do every day about design. But there's something lost in, an office where people aren't connected and learning. But,
Yes.
we had someone who's working on one project here with me that would be the most senior. He's doing that from home, but he's my neighbor, so we have meetings at my place. But I remember someone saying one time that when he was on the phone with the builder saying like, this is wrong and this needs to be fixed. And other people were like, I didn't know you could talk to a builder like that. Like he was very forceful with problems,
Yeah.
but you would never have heard that if he was at home on the phone. So that, he wasn't directly talking to anyone, but you sure learn by seeing how your more experienced peers are handling things.
Yeah. So look, to that point, we actually, internally, we draft emails internally that are going externally, and
Yes.
we have them set up for review. So we use it all through Google Docs, and we get multiple eyes on emails that go outbound to make sure the tone and everybody understands what that communication looks like, so that we know that it's not going to be found offensive, or
Yeah.
that it's to the point. Yeah, creating like these processes are a really important part of making sure that you're all on the same page
Yeah.
for running the business, right? And to your point. because we don't have an office space, you got to do something like that. And what you do for having people together, I think it's really important in design that those offices work where people are there because you can exchange ideas on the spot.
Yes.
You
And
know,
because we're making the drawings, we're not making the building.
correct.
It's almost extra important. Like we're still living in this abstract thing on our screens.
Yeah.
And you don't really look at what's on someone else's screen. That is not terribly meaningful to you as they're zooming around. But yeah, it's interesting how it is a profession that like benefits from the social aspects when you'd think it's just, yeah, but then a group of people build these things. They don't just build themselves or you don't just push a button. So I,
Thankfully not.
yeah. Well, that they're just, that production line kind of robotic part.
Yeah.
I think I just don't know if robotics are going to change architecture as much, maybe in a component way.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest we got was that project in Switzerland where basically the whole roof and all the walls were done by this Wrangley company, all prefab, all done elsewhere. And it went from concrete, they don't do footings, they do floating slabs. Boom, in 2 weeks we had a thing craned in, and I think the windows were right behind it. So that level of prefab, I think, I wish that would become more normal. It's just
Right.
not an American thing.
Yeah. And so in terms of the practice, do you also do is there a plan? Do you have a benefits plan with the employees?
The health and dental,
Yeah.
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 Uh, we had one for a while and it kept going up no matter how they used it. So we switched to these new plans that it's a lump sum of money
Yeah.
and you can either spend it on chiropractor or dental, but you can also spend it on a mountain bike or a yoga class. Like there's flexibility in how you spend it. And it's the bet. And all it is, I mean, I don't know if I should give them a plug. They're out of Calgary. Is that whatever everybody spends, they have an allocation based on their experience, and longer term people have a better plan.
Yeah.
And then spend it on whatever you want, and then I get charged 10% on top.
Right.
And then because honestly, a lot of us like don't need to go to the dentist or might not need any medical or medication, like or chiropractic or
Yeah.
massage.
Yeah.
Well, then these people that didn't need that were healthy, they were getting nothing out of the plan, right?
Right.
So that's been an amazing shift that I think we've been doing for 3 years now.
Incredible. I mean, the concept of being able to get a bike, I trail ride. Like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Well,
Man, like for your health.
but it's win-win because I was
Yeah.
being charged as if they used all of their dental visits every year. I
Right.
mean, the company, and then they had their premium on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's like leaving money out on the sidewalk. Like it was totally useless.
Right.
Um, so they're called health spending plans or lifestyle spending plans, I think.
Incredible.
We would never go back. It's just
Yeah.
the way. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like the prefab of healthcare.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Just crane
Um,
it in. You don't have
and
a bike, right here it is. You need to go to
yeah,
just go ahead. That's incredible.
the office brings in and pays for a Friday lunch every Friday, and that's when we have a talk, and we have
Yeah.
another extra hour to share or look at photos. And turns out everyone's super into photography and just kind of amateur photographers, so it almost becomes a crit session of making better photos. And it often isn't terribly architectural, which is kind of fun. So just to cultivate all those non-architectural things.
Yeah, yeah, but they also create a sense of culture like that. I mean, really, that's what you're talking about right now, and it
Yeah.
sounds like a beautiful culture.
Yeah. And you find common veins through a group of people, which I find really interesting because it changes as people change. But we're particularly into good and interesting food, the group, the office right now. So, that's what people want to do when they're traveling, and we'll try some new restaurant that we bring in.
Yeah,
But it also, that's kind of who our clients are too. Like it helps, I think, as an office, you relate to clients and all their outside interests
right.
because we do have very interesting, I don't know what a typical architect person is that would hire an architect, but we feel quite lucky how eclectic the people are that come to us. And I think we're an eclectic group of people. So maybe they're seeing something in the work and they're seeing something as we do a new project and get it photographed that appeals to them.
Yeah,
So, they're not just people from the arts.
yeah,
There's ferry captains and bus drivers and mechanics. And and professionals and doctors and lawyers, but hardly anything twice, I would say, like that. And that's what I find getting to know people and like pulling that into their project at some point. So
Does the prairie captain look for something nautical in the house?
no, what was he? I'm trying to think what he wanted very specifically. We did in the end, we had this like wraparound glass, and I think one time he has passed away, unfortunately, since then. This was a project quite a number of years ago.
Yeah,
But I was on a ferry to go look at his project one time, and he said, "Let's go up to the deck in the BC ferries because I know everybody, and I'll get you in behind the security because I think it was post 9/11 and they did not let anybody in."
yeah,
But we did kind of make his living room inspired by the bridge of a ferry, that's for
very
sure.
cool.
And what was so beautiful being up there is it was just so quiet. Like
Yeah.
you think it was all buttons and noises, and it was just the most serene part of the trip to watch these people steer a ferry. And
Hmm.
they're all in it real time with a big wheel. Like this isn't autopilot.
Yeah. I
So
I've only been on those ferries, I think it was once. And like what, yeah, it's an experience. It's pretty cool traveling between the islands.
yeah. And then you learn what that job's like. And I mean, I'm interested in like what other people are doing that aren't what I'm doing
Yeah,
and like what goes wrong and like what's the craziest thing that ever happened and
right.
that stuff that they probably couldn't even put in writing, right? So
Yeah. So, I mean, you talk about that, about what other people are doing. So, outside of designing, what else are you involved with within the community? Is is there anything?
or
Yeah.
architecturally
Yeah.
or
Architecturally, or just, I know that you've been a juror recently, and I know that that's something you've done a few times. So what does that look like, and how are people coming to you to request for you to be
um,
part of that?
I mean that's probably what I like. That's the extracurricular architectural thing I like best. I was on the Canadian Architect jury a few months ago
Yeah.
in Toronto. And then that's nicely back in person, which is great. And then the Calgary Mayor's Awards and RAIC and AIBC a number of times. But it's really great to like see people put their best work forward, but to actually say of this work, like what stands out within that work. And it's, you'll be fighting for a project and you'll be outvoted. Like it's really democratic. And every jury I've been on, there's a couple things I wasn't really pushing for, but there's something I quite liked that didn't win. But it's all got to be fair, right?
Right.
So the personality of a jury is, it could be completely. I wouldn't say it's completely different winners if the personalities changed. But I think it could change up to half. And then, I do reviews here in Manitoba. I've done reviews for them, Calgary. Not so much since I was a student there myself, because that just finished technically this week. And then UBC will do reviews out there a little bit here and there when I have time. And I find that quite interesting. I've got one coming up at BCIT. Their program has changed to a degree from a diploma,
Right.
and we'll be doing infill project critique. So and then a lot of people write to me and they'll say, like, I'm thinking about being an architect. And I always think I would have been kind of shy to like write that email, but I probably would have felt like I still had to do it. So if someone like, writes me out of the blue to ask a question like that, I
Yeah.
always like to get back to them or have a phone call, or I'll say, write all your questions and I'll answer them all back to you within a few days. What's it really like to do this? And I would say I do that every week at some like in some form or another. And it can be like
That's pretty awesome.
in France or Germany. This isn't just Canadian students.
Right.
And I like that people look at our website or maybe saw us on Dazine or somewhere that they liked something enough that they like sent me an email.
Yeah,
So
they felt compelled to want to connect. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's
And
what I did.
yeah. And it doesn't take long to like share back. Like this is not hours, it's not days. What if it makes a difference? What if they actually hear something and they don't go into architecture and they're spared all that tuition and they're should have been a doctor or something, right?
Yeah.
Like it's it's kind of career counseling, but which I never really had that, and I would have liked the chance to do it. I just didn't know any architects, and
Right.
there's websites, you wouldn't gonna you work. That's the beauty I think about email is that you wouldn't phone up someone and say, "Can I talk to the principal?"
Unless
But
unless you're me.
yeah, well, maybe we've shifted too much to email, and but it's a softer way
Yes,
to
agreed.
make, because that can just be ignored. It's often, I'm sure probably is ignored a lot,
Yeah.
but you kind of just float it out there, right? Like, would you ever get back to me? And
Yeah, I wrote an email to Jean Nouvel asking if they would participate, if he would participate in the podcast, and I wasn't ignored, but I was denied.
yeah. Oh, they said no.
Yes, and not so many words. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know
With,
what? You don't get what you don't ask for,
yeah.
right?
Somewhere in a folder I have back before email, I used to send photos of our first two or three projects, and I'd send them to Metropolitan Home or Azure or Metropolis. There were different magazines then.
Yeah.
And then they'd write back a letter with a stamp they paid for. And it was basically a long way of saying piss off. And I used to keep them just to like see that like not everything goes your way. But actually that now the effort, people don't even write the email back, right? It goes into the ether and you don't know where the email went. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a few of those ether emails out to a practices Japan right now. So,
Oh yeah. It might just be a time zone thing, right?
I mean, time does the time zone a void of like 3 weeks?
Yeah. Yep. Or they got to run it through Translate and then they'll get back to you. And
Yeah, I actually thought about sending it in Translate, but I was like, I don't know if this will work.
no,
So I chose not to.
yeah.
So tell me, what does life like look like outside of the practice and like, just what you like to do? Is it, or do you have some hobbies about, mu music or travel and food or, what do you like to do to be able to take your mind off of running the practice?
My kids are one's in Toronto
Yep.
and two are in grade 12. I have twins, so we've just been teaching them to drive and
Okay.
get their license. So at the ends, we might not have kids at home for, maybe in about a year.
Empty nest.
Interestingly, me and my older son and our kids are all graduating within a few months of each other from something. But that's kind of fun. We might have a grad party in May
Amazing.
from his undergrad. He's at OCAD.
Yep.
And but I don't have a lot of time in the week, but I like to do Sunday dinner because when I turned 40, my family all got together and sent me to a pro chef school.
Oh, that's
And then
fun.
I continued to go there and take like Italian and French cooking and poultry butchery. And I think there's another one. They would be weekends. So, I mean, altogether, it's people that were considering the restaurant industry, but didn't want to go full bore into it.
Yeah.
That was a huge eye opener for like just basically, here's some confidence to do anything. You can read any recipe and do anything,
Mm.
but I'm not a baker. I like to cook. I like to do like the savory part of a meal. So that's a big part of most weekends.
Yeah.
But
The science of your life goes into the architecture, not the
yeah.
baking. Yeah.
And then we're big readers. We have a book collection that's overflowing. But we really like reading in international newspapers on the weekend,
Oh,
like the art section or anything really from other countries. So, reading UK newspapers just makes you feel like you traveled for that weekend without actually traveling.
yeah.
But probably the biggest thing that I like as much as architecture is music, like the instruments behind you.
Yeah.
And so we try to see live music as much as we can. And, just saw Sue Foley, Canada's best blues guitarist, the day after I talked to you last time. She came to Vancouver. And it's really niche crowd. And I'm actually not that knowledgeable about blues, but we saw her in Austin, Texas, because we traveled down there for South by Southwest a few years ago, which is just a killer music festival.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
film and music, but I would say the music appeals to us more. So we're doing, hoping to do that like, at least every 2 weeks or once a month, see some kind of act live.
And do you
And
play?
what's that? No, I wish I did. Started taking guitar, but it was just bad timing for putting any time into it. But growing up, a lot of friends were in bands, kind of punky things in Abbotsford and thrash metal kind of stuff. But I mean, I go through tangents. Like 10 years ago, I did not understand jazz. I don't even know why people like this. So
Yeah.
just go super deep into it and like, listen to it all, like read reviews, have other people that are experts say you should listen to this and this. And then we did just as deep a dive into country after watching Ken Burns' documentary, which I think it's a sort of the last music that's pure poetry that's kind of out in the world, and it's having a revival, which is great.
Mhm.
Like to find bands when they're up and coming and then see them actually become stadium acts. So I'd actually like to be a record scout, I think. To say like, hey, I listened to these 20 things and that's the one that's going somewhere, that would be like a wicked part-time job, right?
I worked years ago. I worked on a show called Spectacle with Elvis
Okay, yeah.
Costello, and he was the host. And we had tons of talent on that show, and I was working with all of them. U2, the Police, their last ever interview together as a band,
Yeah.
and
Oh, that we're still like hanging out enough to do an interview.
well, I mean, there was there was a little bit of animosity. They didn't
Yeah.
want to be so close to each other at all times, but they were there. They were, I guess, they were good sports about doing this for the
Yeah.
purpose of what it was. Bruce Springsteen was on, and Herbie Hancock, and now the
Yeah.
late Chris Christopherson was on, Diana
Yeah.
Krall, and Elton John, and Roseanne
Yeah.
Cash. Levon Helm before he had passed.
Okay.
Like, just the talent was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you'd sit there, and it was filmed at the Apollo Theater, and you'd sit there and you'd watch these people. I'd have a break, and they would just be up on stage, and they'd just be kind of jamming together. And you're sitting there, you're like, wow,
Well, there's that ease of when you're a pro that I mean it's whatever that 10,000 hour theory is. Like, I mean, these probably are at 30,000 hours,
yeah,
but even Sue last weekend, she opened for herself. Her opening act was her acoustic.
yeah,
Then it's all like her sort of nod to early blues and to Spanish music and the Carter family and just that early stuff that
yeah,
no one really listens to anymore. It's such low production quality. It's actually hard to listen to. But she brought it and made it contemporary again. And then it was like a course, like just, but she's so effortlessly playing.
yeah.
It's like she's 10 different people, right?
It's yeah. I mean, it's remarkable. Are you familiar with the band Broken Social Scene?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, like, have you ever seen them live?
No.
Oh, so like when they play, I've seen them live, and they'll switch instruments. It's these offshoot bands, and they have one of them is called Do Make Say Think, and I saw them. This is like 15 years ago, and those guys rotated throughout the show to the different instruments, and you're sitting there, you're like, how are you able to go from guitar to piano to drums
Yeah.
and play at an equivalent level on each of them?
Right. And it's not a gimmick. It's just
It's
because
just pure raw talent and chemistry as a band. It was beautiful.
could they even go to drums?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the outlier of like who's playing the drums. And like that's nobody else is touching that, right?
No, they were swapping they were swapping between that. It was amazing. To the point you had said about almost inaudible music. I remember listening to some of these early recordings of Robert Johnson when you talk about almost it's the talent level, but the how challenging it can be to listen.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff when it was recorded at levels that like it was almost inaudible.
Yeah.
So
But you can go back to 40s and 50s and hear stuff pretty recorded fairly well, which
yeah,
is, that's when things started to they sound good on a stereo.
yeah,
But you can go back and listen to Muddy Waters and see why he was standing out amongst his peers because
okay,
it could be today.
yeah, completely,
There's something timeless.
yeah,
The timeless part of music, I think, is what appeals to me the most. That, make it all really crystal clear so you don't hear scratchiness. And then, like, really try to date when that song was done. I
yeah,
think that's perfect when you can't.
agreed.
There's a guy, we're probably going to have to travel down to Texas to see him before he stops playing. Ray Wiley Hubbard has played a lot in our house.
Okay,
Then James McMurtry, we went down to Tacoma to see him play. He'd be in his 60s, not in his 70s. But you start realizing like you can't see these people live forever. Like you need to see them while you have the opportunity.
yeah,
And they're really musicians like this, they're not filling stadiums, and that's probably my favorite kind of music.
yeah. I would agree. When you can go see a band in an intimate setting,
Yeah, like I want to be like 10, 15 feet from them, not
Yeah,
like
let's share the same
not
oxygen.
like with binoculars and yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Darcy, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking time, especially 2 Saturdays in a row, to be able to go through all of this with me and to share some of the stories that you've had over the years. Even now, talking about the joy of listening to music together. So I'm humbled by it. I appreciate the time, and it has been a pleasure getting to know you and about your practice over the last couple of weeks.
Well, likewise, it's been nice chatting.
So thank you. I look forward to maintaining contact, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to build one of the beautiful pieces of architecture that your practice designs.
I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.